Okay, so I thought this was going to be a like one part shiur, but as usually happens, then as I was preparing this morning, it just kept growing and growing and growing. So this might be a two-parter. Okay, so as I was just saying now before the recording, this started off with a question that was sent to me. Okay, the question was, what, and this is the copied and pasted question, what is the impetus for one to follow halachos de Rabbanan, rabbinic laws? When I'm sitting alone at night in the privacy of my home, what should motivate me not to eat chicken with cheese? Okay, so very basic, but very broad reaching question. Okay. And I actually had to clarify when the person asked me, because I said, are you asking halachically or philosophically? And I sounded like they wanted both. In other words, like, where do rabbinic laws get their authority? And then what should motivate me, like in terms of how does this improve me? How does this, enrich my life? Like what is the actual motive other than just saying it's the law, So I want to try to address both the questions. All right. And if there are any other questions that you guys have that are within this, the scope of this topic, feel free to ask them, because we're going to try to answer, as much as we can. Okay. So let me lay out the game plan, the way I envision it. And again, this kind of came together last minute in terms of, I expanded the game plan. Okay. So today's game plan is, first step is we're going to answer the question, what is first step is the facts. Okay. What is the scope and what is the nature of rabbinic authority? Okay. And the reason why we're doing this is to make sure that we're all on the same page. Okay. And I realized as I was preparing this, like not everyone, like I was, there's a certain assumption about like that we all know what Rabbanans are. And then I realized like not everyone really knows, and not everyone's been through the sources. Like even if you think you know what it means for something to be, asur midrabanan, like have you ever seen the sources inside? And I thought this would be a good opportunity to like either review or go through that. Okay, number two is we're going to read the central source of the shiur, which I've characterized here as a baffling midrash riffing off of an unusual mishnah, commenting on a mysterious pasuk from a cryptic sefer of Tanach, which raises a perplexing question. Okay, and you'll see. Hopefully, I'll convince you that all these adjectives apply. Okay, and again, the question that we're aiming to answer is the question I was sent, but the source we're going to deal with focuses on one specific remark in the Gemara. Okay, one specific midrash. All right, so we're going to get that question clear. Okay, then step three is we're going to begin learning an answer from the Ran. The Ran is Rabbinic Nisim of Gerona, who was in the 13th century or 1300s, I believe. And he wrote a series of drushos of, like, I don't know, you call them sermons on various topics in philosophy and halacha. And I found a really good, actually it's several answers that he gives to explain. This is where I encountered this midrash, and he gives 4 explanations of the midrash, which I think if we learn his answer, then we'll be able to answer our original question. Okay, but keyword here is begin, because I realize this is going to take us longer than we have, and I am going to try to aim for an hour because I feel like that's been a good amount of time, and what we'll do is we'll try to find a good stopping point. Might be an hour, give or take, and then we'll pick it up next week, Bli Neder. Okay. All right. Now, here's one thing I also realized about these Friday shiurim, and again, I don't know why I didn't realize this earlier. So I checked how many people listen to the Friday shiurim. So it turns out, so usually there's like 3 or 4 or 5 people who attend. Usually there are, if combined with the podcast and with YouTube, we get about 50 to 60 people who listen to it. And what I realized is that you guys really should be proxies for the listeners who don't attend. And what I mean by that is that, like, I don't know who exactly listens to these shiurim, but I'm sure that they have questions as well. And so what I want to explicitly state here is that, obviously I always encourage you to ask your own questions, but I also want to encourage you to ask questions that you yourself don't have, but you can envision someone else having. Okay, like let's say, for example, we're going over something in stage 1, the facts. Okay, and you think to yourself, okay, well, I know this thing, but I feel like someone might ask this question, and so I'm gonna voice the question, and then I'll answer it. Not that I want to put responsibility on you, but I also want, like, I want to acknowledge that this has a bigger audience than the people present in the Zoom room right now. Okay, and also let's say you have a question, you shouldn't be ashamed to ask any question, but let's say you have a question that you're ashamed to answer. I'm also kind of giving you a matir to like ask a question. This isn't my question. It's just a question I think someone might ask. Okay. You can even introduce it like that. Like someone might ask the following question. Okay. So I just wanted to open the floor for that. All righty. I guess, does anyone have any questions that we can add to the list about the topic of the shiur, about derabbanan in general, that you want to get on the table now before we even start? I know that's like a big general question.
I just want to think for a second.
Sure.
I guess about the shiur itself, is this going to be like more of a foundational thing to explain what the deal is with derabbanan and the weight that it holds?
Yes, it will do that also. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. That's what I hope to do.
I actually have a question.
Sure.
It's a question that was actually asked to me once, and I was like, wow, that's a really good question. I actually don't know the answer to that. That if you actually look in, I think it's Sefer Ezra, you see that the people didn't know what the holiday of Sukkot was. And that kind of like over time, the Gaonim and other different Rabbanim created this system where we were more focused on keeping halacha and making it more central to our lives and creating more literature on it. So if at the beginning of time we weren't so makpid or weren't so knowledgeable as the Jewish people probably in like the times of like the kings, then how did this system come about where we became more, I guess, conscious of the different details of halacha? And then why did, and I know like, I'm sure you're going to go over this, Hashem outright says, lo tasor, like don't stray from what the rabbis say, but was Hashem's intention to be so detail oriented?
Okay, so those, not only is that a good question, but it's several good questions. And not only is it several good questions, it's several good questions that I think deserve their own shiurim. And in my mind, as you're asking it, there's really three questions. Okay, one of which I think we will address partially, and the other two I think deserve to be their own shiurim. The first question is, what's up with that situation in Sefer Ezra, where like people seemingly didn't know what the holiday of Sukkot was? Okay. Secondly, what has been the evolution of the halachic system, both the corpus of halacha and then the education of halacha in the Jewish people, like the educational level throughout the ages. So those are the two questions that I think really deserve their own treatment, which we will not address except indirectly, perhaps. And then the third question, though, of like how detailed did Hashem, foresee halacha being? I think we will probably touch upon that in the course of our answers. Okay. And if we don't, feel free to remind me. That one I do actually want to address in this. Okay. So yeah, I'll put a note to myself here to remind.
Can you state the last question?
Yeah. So let's formulate it here. Okay. So let's go Maya's question, which is how detailed of a system was halacha designed to be from the get-go, and how much did it evolve / devolve to become such? Is that a fair treatment of your question? Okay, yeah. In other words, like I was just remarking the other day in my shiur last night that well, I'll give an example. Like if you look at the Rambam's Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah, okay, so, and that's all the halachos of Pesach. So he has them all in 8 chapters, okay. And if you exclude the Seder stuff, if you just look at like chametz, related things, then it's 5 chapters, okay. Like you could fit it on like 2 pieces of paper, right? Now, if you go to your local Judaica store and you buy a Pesach guide, okay, it's hundreds of pages, or let's say like in Basar B'Chalav, milk and meat, 1 chapter in the Rambam, right? But if you study for smicha, it's reams and reams and reams of paper. So something happened, that like resulted, and that's just from the time of like the Rishonim into the time of like the Achronim. And if you go back even further before the Rishonim to the Gaonim or to the Gemara, like there's been a tremendous like proliferation of halachic texts and halakhic opinions. So how much of that is just by design? How much of that is to be expected in the normal course of like halacha? And how much of that is like not good, or not like, like beyond the scope of what Hashem intended, like a bad thing. That's why I use the word devolve. Yeah. Okay. And, truthfully, that might branch off into its own shiur also, because that kind of overlaps with the second question. All right. So, but definitely a good question here. Okay. Anyone else want to get anything else on the table? All right.
Wait,
So let's
I
get
have to
started.
sign off and come back in. I have a question, but I'm having a problem again with my phone.
Okay, sure. All right. All right. So I should have asked Esty, how long are you gonna take you to come back? But let's give her like 30 seconds and then we'll start. Okay. Well, actually, I'll start going into the oh, there's Esty. Okay. Yeah. All right. So once Esty connects, then we'll
Okay, hi, I'm back.
okay. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so that just related to my question, which was just how are we supposed to relate to all these things? In other words, if we, have an idea of different, philosophical benefits of different mitzvot, then how do we relate to these durabanans that are extensions of the halacha, but may or may not seem to relate? I understand you're not doing the mitzvahs because of the time, you're doing it because of, you keep up the system, but sometimes it seems like there's layers upon layers upon layers of details, and how do we relate to that?
Right. Okay, good. So I think that question is included in what the original asker said, questioner said, which is like how do we relate to it? But I like the actual broader formulation of how do we relate to it and these different layers and levels. Okay, good. All right, let's get started with part one. Okay, part one is the facts and the facts, the scope and nature of rabbinic authority. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the Rambam because the Rambam here presents it in the most clear way. And the Rambam really is also the foundation of the Ran. We're going to be spending most of our time in the Ran, but the Ran ends off by saying the Rambam wrote about this. And so I figured let's just go right to the source. Okay, so the Rambam here, and again, for those who are new here, you can feel free to interrupt me at any time. Okay, and I'm going to read. I put my English translation here, but I'm going to read it in the Hebrew. Okay, because I think it's good. All right. So Rambam, this is in Rambam in the Mishnah Torah in Sefer Shoftim, the book of Judges, Hilchos Mamrim, the laws of rebels. Based in Haggadah Shabi Yerushalayim, the Supreme Court in Yerushalayim, Heim Iker Torah Shabal Peh. They are the essence of the oral law. V'heim Amud HaHorah, and they are the pillar of instruction. And the word Horah here is a little difficult. Literally means instruction. I think what we are used to here is we call this Pesach. So it means like legalistic instruction. Okay, they are the pillar of legalistic instruction. And from them, statute and judgment go forth to all of Israel. Torah, and regarding them, the Torah promises and says, Al pi Torah asher yerucha, val hamishpat asher yomru lecha taseh. That's a pasuk in Devarim 17:11, which says, according to the Torah they instruct you, and according to the judgment they say to you, you shall act. Zo mitzvos aseh. This is a positive commandment. V'chol hama'amin b'Moshe Rabbeinu u'v'toraso, and anyone who believes in Moshe Rabbeinu and his Torah, chayav lismoch ma'aseh hadas aleihem, is obligated to make their religious acts be based upon them, ulhishayin aleihem, and to rely on them. Okay, we're going to pause in a second, just one more sentence. Okay, kol mi she'eno oseh b'hora'asan, anyone who does not act in accordance with their legalistic instruction, over belos aseh, transgresses a Torah prohibition. Shneimar, as it says, and this is the pasuk Maya quoted, lo sasur mikol hadavar asher yagidu lecha. Do not deviate from anything that they tell you. Rest of the pasuk says yaminu small, to the left or to the right. Okay, so according to the Rambam, there are two biblical mitzvos, two Torah mitzvos, which are the foundation of rabbinic authority. One is a mitzvos aseh, which is al pi Torah asher yerucha, according to the Torah that they instruct you, you shall. And according to the judgment that they tell you, you shall do or you shall act. And then the second one is a los aseh, a biblical prohibition. Lo sasar mikol hadavar asher yagidu lecha. Do not deviate from anything that they tell you. And who's the they? The they is based in Haggadah Shabi Yerushalayim, the Supreme Court in Yerushalayim. And this is something that I like to tell. I don't know, Nava, if you're going to remember this from any of my classes, but like I think that there are some students who I've seen students who enter into the into high school, and like when we say the word rabbis, in their mind, there's no difference between like the Rav of their shul and Rashi and like the Tanaim and Amoraim, and we could laugh at that if we know better, but not everyone knows better. That when so I like to use the word rabbis with a capital R and rabbis with a lowercase r. Okay, rabbis with a lowercase r refers to like anyone who has smicha or anyone who is called rabbi, like nowadays. Rabbis with a capital R, when we talk about rabbinic law, means specifically the rabbis who were on the Sanhedrin Hagadol, the Supreme Court in Yerushalayim, with 71 members that sat in the Lishkas Hagazis in the Chamber of Hewn Stone in the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, they're the ones who have the authority to enact laws that are binding on all of Klal Yisrael, and they no longer are around. Okay, we haven't had a Beis Din Hagadol for close to, I don't know, I always am bad with the exact dates about when the last Sanhedrin was, but like 2000-ish years. And there are such things as lower courts, like we have a Beis Din, Bate Dinim nowadays that have judges who paskin on monetary matters or on, divorce or whatever. But the Supreme Court that has the authority to make laws is only the Sanhedrin. Okay, and throughout my English translation here, I call them rabbis with a capital R or sages with a capital S. Okay, just to differentiate them from rabbis like commonplace garden variety rabbis. Okay, so any questions on this so far? Okay, so again, according to the Rambam, it turns out that what gives the rabbis with a capital R their authority is two mitzvos in the Torah: a mitzvah saseh, a positive commandment of al pi Torah asher yerucha, and a negative commandment of lo sasur mikol hadavar asher yigidu l'cha yamin u'shmol, which means, and the Ram's going to talk at length about this after the Rambam, if you violate any halacha midirabanan, you are also violating two deoraisas, two Torah laws, a positive one and a negative one. Okay, so it's a double whammy. Okay, and in that sense,
mitzvah. I'm sorry. I don't understand the positive mitzvah.
Yeah, the positive mitzvah, which the Rambam is going to elaborate on in a second, is you have to follow what the Sanhedrin says, and the negative one is you may not deviate from what the Sanhedrin says. And in principle, these are the same. In other words, there are many laws in the Torah where there is a positive and a negative commandment that both practically prohibit the same thing. But the fact that there are two of them either means that there is a positive idea in addition to the prohibition, or it means that the Torah just wants to reinforce it. So for example, with Shabbos, there's a mitzvah of a positive mitzvah of shvisa, of resting on Shabbos. And then there's a negative mitzvah of don't do any malacha. Now, in practice, those are the same, but because this is something that is so, important, the Torah reinforces it with 2 out of the 613 mitzvos. Does that answer your question, or am I misunderstanding your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so now the question is, what exactly do the rabbis have the authority to make? Okay, so the Rambam goes on and he says like this. So he says 3 categories, okay? Echad devarim shalamdu osan mipia shmua, whether principles that they learn from the oral tradition, vehim Torah shebal peh, and that's what we call Torah shebal peh, the echad devarim shalamdu osan mipi da'atan ba'achas min hamidos she'atorah nidreshes behen, or whether it is a principle they derived of their own accord using one of the midos she'atorah nidreshes behen, which is the methods of biblical exegesis. Okay, I would use a different word for exegesis if there were one, but I don't know one. I used to, when I was a little kid and I heard people say exegesis, I thought they were saying acts of Jesus. And I thought it was like some sort of religious thing. Exegesis means deriving things from the text. Okay. Venira be'enehem shadin b'davar zeh kachu, and it seemed in their eyes that the law in this matter was such. Okay. Or echad devarim she'asu osan siag laTorah, principles they instituted as a fence for the Torah, ulefi ma shehasha'a tzricha, and in accordance with the needs of the times. V'hem, and these are hagzeros, v'hatakanos, v'haminhagos. Okay, gzeros, which I'm translating as decrees, takanos, which I'm translating as enactments, and minhagos, which I'm translating as customs. B'chol echad de'echad mishloshet devarim elu, in each and every one of these 3 things, mitzvos aseh lishmo lahen, it is a positive commandment to obey them, to obey the Sanhedrin. Over al kol achas mehen over belos aseh, and one who transgresses any one of these 3 things has transgressed a negative prohibition from the Torah. Okay, and one more paragraph here, and then I want to come back and come up with examples to make sure that we know what he's talking about. Okay, he says, so he's going to just show how this is alluded to in the psukim that we quoted. Hari hu omer. It says in the pasuk, al pi Torah asher yerucha, according to the Torah that they instruct you, elu gezeros v'takanos v'minhagos sheyuru behem l'rabim. These are the decrees, enactments, and customs that they instruct the public. L'chazik hadas u'lasakin ha'olam, in order to strengthen the religion and to improve the world. Okay, we'll get back to that in a second. Ve'al ha'mishpat sheyomer l'cha taseh, and in accordance with the judgment that they tell you you shall do. Okay, you shall act. Elu devarim shalamdu osan min hadin ba'achas min amidos she'Torah nidresses behen. These are the principles that they derived through one of the methods of biblical exegesis. And then the last category is mikol hadavar asher yagidu lecha, from anything that they tell you. Zo hakabbalah, this is the tradition they received, I should say the oral tradition they received. Ish mipi shekibul ish mipi ish, that they received one person from another going back to Moshe at Sinai. Okay, so let's just recalibrate here. Okay, according to the Rambam, there are three categories of rabbinic authority. Okay, one is what we call Torah Shebal Peh, which goes all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. The second is laws derived from the midos shehatorah nidrashas behen, from the methods of biblical exegesis. And then the third category, we're just going to call halachos midrabanan, which the Rambam divides into three categories: gezerah, takana, and minhag. Okay, and what I want to do, just to make sure that we are oriented properly, is I want to give familiar examples in all 3/6 of these categories, just so we know what he's talking about here. Okay, so what would be an example of something which is Torah Shebal Peh? And actually, sorry, let me just set the stage a little bit more. There is a severe misunderstanding, okay, that I've encountered not only in high school students, but in yeshiva students, that they think that rabbinic and oral Torah are one and the same. Okay, not true. Okay, not true at all. When we talk about Torah Shebal Peh, we mean explanations of how to keep the mitzvos in the written Torah that were given to Moshe by Hashem at Sinai. Okay, that's Torah Shebal Peh. So give me some examples of Torah Shebal Peh teachings that you are familiar with. Okay, and we'll list them. And I think examples are clear here because we got to get these categories clear. Not to put anyone on the spot. What are things that are in the written Torah that are not created or derived by the rabbis, but were told to Moshe at Sinai and passed down by the rabbis?
Like all the mitzvos in Sefer Divrot just came to mind, like keeping Shabbos and honoring your parents and not stealing and not killing.
Well, what do you mean all the mitzvos? I mean, those are Torah Shebechsav. Those are the written Torah.
Okay, so let's say like low talk mode, right? That like
right.
how that works out, what that means, what the parameters are, what you're not allowed to do, not allowed to do, not allowed to take something.
Okay. So explanations of the mitzvos in the Torah Shebechsav, like it says lo sachmo, don't covet. Okay. So what practically does that mean? Does that mean that I can't like want something that my friend has? So you have Torah Shebal Peh, which says no, it doesn't mean wanting what your friend has. So I'll just fill in the detail here with that example. It means that if you want something that your friend owns, and you go so far as to put pressure on them to sell it to you or to give it to you, that's what it means to covet. And once you go that far and you actually acquire it, so then that is lo sachmod. Okay. So let me just spell this out here. Okay. So all the halachic explanations of the mitzvos contained in Torah Shebechsav, okay, the written Torah. Okay, and in fact, you know what? I think it's a good example, Esty. I'm going to actually give a more familiar one, just because Lo Sachman is not one that people even think about that much. So I'll give the Rambam example. Okay, for example, basukos. Let's say okay. So the pasuk says basukos teshu shivas yamim, dwell in a sukkah for 7 days. Okay, so let's say the Torah says, okay, basukos teshvu. Sorry, not bakosos. My mind was on the run. Basukos teshvu shivas yamim. Okay, which means dwell in huts for 7 days. Okay, sorry, the written Torah says this. Okay, but the oral Torah explains, okay, what is a sukkah, right? What is a sukkah? What are its dimensions? Okay, what materials can be used? Okay, who is obligated in it and who is exempt? Okay, so those are examples of that. Okay, alternatively, here's another. Let's just, while we're on sukkahs, okay. Let's see, another example, right? So the Torah says, the written Torah says to take a pre-eitz hadar, which means the fruit of a beautiful tree. Okay. And the oral Torah explains that this is an esrog, okay, which is a citron. So these are examples where the rabbis are the ones who passed down this teaching, but they did not innovate it, and they did not even derive it. It's something that was told to Moshe Rabbeinu, and there is no machlokas on. There's no machlokas on the fact that Priyetz Hadar means an esrog. Okay, or let's say another example is another example, common example here. Okay, ayin tachas ayin, right? An eye for an eye means monetary payment, not literal eye gouging. Okay, so or another example. Okay, hold on a second. I know, like it seems like I'm giving too many examples, but I'd rather err on the side of caution. Another example is lo tavashel gedi b'chalev imo. Don't cook a baby goat in its mother's milk. Refers to all domesticated animals in any milk, okay, not just a kid in his mother's milk. So again, people think that the rabbis are the ones who extended this to be, not just a goat, but cows and sheep also, and not just a baby one, but in its mother's milk, but anyone. No, this is from Har Sinai, okay. So that is Torah Sheba'al Peh, is the explanations of the Mitzvos and Torah Sheba'al given at Har Sinai. Okay. Next category, unless there are questions. Okay, examples of laws derived from the midrash Torah Nidreshes Ben. So this is something that's a little bit esoteric, and we're not going to give as many examples here just because they're too unfamiliar. Does anyone have an example of one of the 13 principles of biblical exegesis? Torah Nidreshes Ben. I think there's one that's more commonly known than all of them, but I'll take whichever one you want.
Is this referring to like Machshavah and other tools that we use?
Yes. Okay, so I heard Machshavah, and then Esty, did you just say Kal V'chomer?
Yeah, that's popular.
Okay, good. So Kal V'chomer. So Kal V'chomer means, so again, a fortiori, right? Which is an argument from a light case to a stringent case. Okay, so does anyone have an example where we learn out a halacha from a kal v'chomer, where the Torah says something in a like lighter case, and then we infer it to a stringent case? I know we use kal v'chomer all the time in our own reasoning, but I'm looking for something where like there is a prohibition that is not, that the strict version is not stated in the Torah, and only the lenient one is, and then we derive it from the lenient one, or I shouldn't say lenient. We derive it from the lighter case, the minor case. I was going to say minor to a case, minor case to a major case. Okay, I'll give you an example. Okay, such as the Torah only prohibits a man from sleeping with his granddaughter. Okay, but there is no pasuk prohibiting, hold on a second. There's no pasuk what's happening? Prohibiting a man from sleeping with his daughter. Okay. Nevertheless, Chazal learn out from a kal v'chomer that if sleeping with your granddaughter is biblically prohibited, then all the more so sleeping with your daughter. Now, I'm using this example because it is an extreme case where the Torah itself does not have any pasuk that prohibits sleeping with your daughter, but the rabbis learn out from a derivation, and it has the actual force of biblical law. And this is not something that they got from Sinai. This is something that they themselves derived. Okay. The other example from Maya is that Maya mentioned is another example is Gezerah Shava, okay, which is when the sages saw a word in one context and the same word in another context, and they transposed halachos from one place to the other. Anyone have an example of Gezerah Shava on hand that they want to give?
I think there's
Yeah,
this idea that it says tepav by Pesach and tepav by Sukkot.
good. That was the example I was going to give also, right? Okay. For example, it says 15th by Pesach and 15th by Sukkot. And from there, we learn that just as you have to eat, just as you are obligated to eat a kazayis of matzah on the first night of Pesach, so too you have to eat a kazayis of bread in the sukkah on the first night of Sukkot. Okay, and again, this is not something that was passed down at Sinai to Moshe, and it's also not midrabanan. Okay, it's a at least according to my understanding of this, it's something that they derived. Okay, so it has, and we're obligated to follow it based on the Torah law. Okay, hopefully those examples suffice. Okay,
Is that
now,
called a derabanan?
yes. So it's not called a derabanan. Okay, it's called a deraisa. Another example of this would be, I'm just trying to think of another common example of a gezerah shava that we like have in our day-to-day life. Let me just quickly look. By the way, if you want to look at examples of all 13, so in any art scroll sitter, at the end, right at the end of the stuff before Shacharis, they have Rabbi Yishmael with the 13 midrash of Torah and the Dreshas Behen, and then in the footnotes they have examples of all of them. So I just got this in case I needed it. Hold on just 1 second here. Okay, these are unfortunately are all things that are okay. This is an example that's not so known today. So it says many laws regarding the technical processes of divorce and betrothal are derived from one another because scripture mentions divorce and betrothal in the same phrase, saying v'yatza'a v'haisa le'ish acher, that she shall depart and become betrothed to another man. The juxtaposition implies that the two changes of marital status are accomplished through similar legal processes, right? So it spells out some halachos by divorce and some halachos by marriage, and they're extrapolated and applied to each other. So that's not called derabanan, that is called deoraisa, but it is explained and derived by the rabbanan. Okay, last category is what we just call halachos derabanan. So there are three categories: gezer, takana, and minhag. And the Rambam said that that these are made for two reasons. One is, he says it's lasos osan siag laTorah, ulfi masha tzricha, that they're made as a safeguard for the Torah based on what the needs of the times are. And then he said down here that they are lachazik hadas, to strengthen the religion, ulasakin ha'olam, and to improve the world. Okay, so gezerah. Let's start with gezerah and takana. Okay, gezerah are prohibitions and takanos are positive enactments. So can you give me an example of a well-known gezerah? Well, we had one example, right? Not to eat chicken and milk, okay, which protects the Torah law of not eating meat and milk. Okay, other examples of gezerahs that are well-known.
Kitnios.
Okay, so kitnios is an interesting one because that's actually a minhag. Okay, that's not a gezerah. Okay, so we'll get to minhag in a little while.
Okay, good.
Yeah, good. This is that itself, that alone warrants this whole thing, because I feel like these categories are not gone over in most people's Jewish education, and like I want to make sure that we all have them clear because it's very easy to get them mixed up. So there are many things on Shabbos, okay? Many Shabbos prohibitions designed to, which forbid actions which lead to malacha or which resemble malacha. Okay, so for example, there are certain forms of warming things that we require a visible, like you can't put something directly on a stove or on a heat source, without having some sort of like visible what do you call a heker, right? Like some sort of like visible demonstration that you're not actually cooking. Or another example, here's a common example, right? Is there's a category of muksa, of not moving prohibited objects on Shabbos that are used to do malacha with. So let's say like a pen, writing on Shabbos is a biblical prohibition, but handling a pen is rabbinic, because if you handle a pen, you might come to write with it. Or let's say, for example, on a biblical level, then only writing in a competent professional manner is usher. So writing with your dominant hand. But let's say writing with your left hand on Shabbos, if you're a righty, then writing with your left hand on Shabbos is only usher midirabanan. But they did that because people might see someone writing with their left hand and think it's mutter to write on Shabbos, So that's another example. Let's just do one more example.
Was that like shofar, like shofar on Shabbos?
Yeah. Okay. Correct. Right. So that is that's an unusual example, but that is an accurate example, which is they prohibited us from sounding a shofar on Shabbos Rosh Hashanah, okay, because one might come to carry it and violate a malacha deoraisa. Okay. One more example, which is we stop eating chametz early midirabanan, so as not to accidentally eat chametz in the deoraisa time frame. Okay. So that's that. Okay, those are gezeras. Those are prohibitions which are designed to protect. I was going to say this outright. Okay, rabbinic prohibitions designed to protect Torah laws. Okay, for example, yeah, fine. Okay. All right, now takanos are positive enactments that are designed to strengthen the religion, like the Rambam says, or did he say it? To strengthen the religion and to improve the world. Okay, so these are rabbinic, so positive rabbinic enactments, enactments designed to strengthen the religion and to improve the world. So can you think of any takanos? Okay, things that were created by the rabbis to strengthen religion or improve the world. And this would be easy. Not to put pressure on you. How about this one? All brachos, okay, except for Birkas Hamazon. Okay, so in other words, Birkas Hamazon on meals is from the Torah. All other brachos are just designed to help you to recognize and praise God and thank God and ask God for things. Okay, to improve the world in that way. Okay. Any other ones?
Laws on Netilat Yadayim.
Okay, good. Washing hands before eating bread, right? So that is both for cleanliness, instituted. So this was instituted for like kedusha, unikius, right? So for holiness and cleanliness, and to habituate people to keep tuma v'tahara awareness alive, even without a mikdash. Okay, that's a more complicated reason for the Kohanim. Okay, here's another one. Okay, this is the slip I made before, the Freudian typo. The 4 cups on Pesach, right? So that's not midoraisa. What I do that is to make us feel like we're free. Okay, to say Hallel, okay, on holidays, right? To praise God for national salvation. Okay, to read the Megillah, to light Shabbos candles. Okay, to light Ner Hanukkah. So these are all positive enactments, right? To daven 3 times a day. Okay, yeah, all right. So many derbanans, they're all created to eat 3 meals on Shabbos. Okay, and if you look into all of these, then all of these are designed to either bring out certain themes or perfections from the doraisas. Let's say like eating 3 meals on Shabbos, part of Shabbos is oneg, which is a d'oraisa principle, which is you should have enjoyment on Shabbos, but they mandated that you eat 3 meals and have delectable foods, to bring it out. Or lighting Shabbos candles is for kavod Shabbos, which is a d'oraisa principle, but they said that basically, to have a well-lit home will promote like peace and happiness in the household. Okay.
Rabbi Shneis?
Yes.
Where do most kashrus laws fall in? Is it this type? Is it the
So
protection
most
type?
kashrus laws are going to fall into most rabbinic kashrus laws will fall into gezeros because most of them are prohibitions. In fact, I can't think of a single. I mean, there might be. I can't think of a single kashrus law that is a positive enactment. Most of them are additional prohibitions. Unless I'm missing something.
Okay, yeah, no, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. And then look, there are obscure ones also. Like, why can't we eat filet mignon, right? Because gid hanashe is biblically prohibited. The sciatic nerve is biblically prohibited to eat. But then there are a bunch of fats that are around the gid hanashe that are rabbinically prohibited, and a lot of people don't know how to shecht in ways that can can remove that. So that's another prohibition. Or not to have meat and milk on the same table, or to wait after eating meat before you eat milk, right? So those are our kashrus, and those are prohibitions. Okay, now this last category is the most misunderstood. Okay, minhag. Now the reason why this is the most misunderstood is because we use the term minhag in an overly broad way. Okay, first of all, people use minhag just to refer to things that Jews do. Like I always used to say in high school that in my high school classes that you need to differentiate between 4 levels of hold on a second. Why am I blanking on this? Oh yeah, I used to say you have to differentiate between 4 levels of halakha. Okay, deoraisa from the Torah, Rabonin in terms of minhag, in terms of gezer and takana, minhag, okay, and then what I call bagels and lox. Okay, bagels and lox is things that Jews do. They eat bagels and lox, but it has nothing to do with actual halakha. All right, but so that's one misuse of the word minhag, of just things that people do. Or people say like, oh, it's my minhag to like listen to a certain song when I'm getting ready for Shabbos. No, that's not your minhag. That's like your personal custom. That's not a halakhic minhag. Another use of the term minhag, which is not what the Rambam means here, is anytime there's a machlokes between 2 different opinions about how we paskin, then let's say, like, for example, there is a what's common machlokes that Ashkenazim and Sephardim differ on. I'm not kidding you. Let's say like, why am I blanking on examples? See, this is why I wanted to get examples down. This is not the most.
I have a question. Is like an example of this where like Sephardim won't have cheese with their fish?
That is an example, but because it's overly complex, and then I don't want to use that as the example. Okay, it is a valid example. Yeah.
Slichos?
Slichos is another. Slichos is another example, but that's also overly complex. We'll talk about slichos in a second. Here's an example.
Heating up liquid on Shabbos?
Okay, that is another example. I'm just going to go this other one because I also kind of want to stay away from controversial examples. So let's take Hanukkah candles. Okay, so the minhag among, so there's there is a, okay, hold on a second. All right, you know what? Sorry, I'm just going to go to a very simple example. Okay, how many brachos do you make on tefillin? And I know this is not the most relevant example for a women's shiur, right? But most Ashkenazim hold that you make a bracha on the head tefillin and on the arm tefillin, and that's based on the rush. And then other Rishonim hold you just make one bracha on both of them. Okay, and most Ashkenazim go like the rush, and most Sephardim go like the opinion that you make one bracha. So people will say the minhag of Ashkenazim is to do that, and the minhag of Sephardim is to do that. That's not the type of minhag that the Rambam is talking about. That is like a minhag, that is a legitimate use of the term minhag, but that is not the way that the Rambam is talking about it. That just has to do with like which communities follow which different halachic authorities. Okay, what is the Rambam talking about? So he's talking about customs that arose in Klal Yisrael that were officially ratified by the Sanhedrin. Okay, so for example, slichos. Okay, so this is, hold on a second. Customs that organically arose in Klal Yisrael but were officially ratified by the Sanhedrin. Okay, when we had a Sanhedrin. Okay. For example, okay, saying slichos during the Aseres Yemei Teshuvah, and I'll give another example, is changing the text of certain brachos during that time. Okay, right? So we change from Hakel HaKadosh to Hamelech HaKadosh, right? So these are things that were not instituted by Chazal, but what happened is people started doing them. Again, slichos are like waking up early in the morning to have supplication prayers, before davening, and then what happened was Chazal basically like gave these things their stamp of approval and then gave halachic form to them. Okay, or another example, and this is a very weird one because we don't even think about this as a minhag. Okay, keeping 2 days of Yom Tov outside of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so this is an example that started off as a minhag, where because of the way that the calendar was set up, and it was based on the testimony of witnesses who saw the new moon, and then they had to convey the message to everybody, and the runners wouldn't get out in time, then the Jews who were outside of Israel wouldn't be, they would have a 1 day off doubt, and so they would keep every Yom Tov for 2 days, just in case. And then what happened is that Chazal said, okay, this is a good practice, and then they officially made this halachically obligated. Okay, so
that's
these
a
are
minhag, not a derabanan.
Say it again.
So that's a minhag, not a derabanan. I mean,
So
it's
it was a
derabanan.
minhag. It was a minhag that got onto the status of a halacha derabanan because it was officially sanctioned by Chazal. But it started off as a minhag. The way I see it, and this is my own description. Okay, really, there are only two like legal forms of derabanans: prohibitions and positive enactments. But the difference is a gezerah, and it kind of came from the Sanhedrin themselves, whereas a minhag, which could be a positive enactment or a prohibition, came from the people, and then Chazal like endorsed it. Okay.
Would an example of this be that women took it upon themselves to hear shofar? So then would that be a minhag that became a takana, or is that more complicated?
So that would not be, because technically speaking, women still do not have to hear shofar. That would be, it's a minhag in the descriptive sense that a lot of women do it. But that reminds me of another one. Okay, and again, this is also complicated. But this is an open something. Hold on, this is an open. I don't know where to find a source for it. Okay, there's a hold on a second. I'm just blanking on it. Just give me 1 second. I just have to get the actual source. Okay, I believe this is an example. Okay, so in Hilchos, and I'm not going to go into the details here. Okay, so in Hilchos Nida, then there is a difference between a Nida and a Zava, depending on the nature of the blood that the woman sees. And so there is a famous, is it a Brisa? Hold on. It is here. Amar Rabbi Zera. Okay, so I don't know what the source of this is. I thought this siddur had the source in it. Amar Rabbi Zera, Benos Yisrael hein hechmiru al asman she'afilu ro'os dam tipo kachado yoshvos aleh shivas yimei nikim. That even if they see the drop of blood the size of a mustard seed, then they sit on it for 7 days, meaning they for 7 clean days, meaning that they treat it with the chumrah of with the full chumrah of nida, so like that's something that came from Jewish women, and then it was endorsed, and then that became the halacha. Okay, so these are very, very like specific things that people don't use in this way. Here, another example. I think this is an example, and see, even I'm in doubt about which ones are like this. That that the minhag when counting the omer is to count days and weeks. Okay, not just days or weeks. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's minhag. But the point I'm trying to make here for minhag is that when the Rambam says minhag that has the force of a doraisa, it means something that was sanctioned by the Sanhedrin. So let's take Maya's example. It is customary for women nowadays to hear shofar, but women do not have to do that because it was never officially sanctioned by the Sanhedrin to do that. Okay. So any questions? So now we've seen, I hope this was useful, by the way. I know we spent a lot of time on this, and I'm realizing that we're almost at our time ending. But again, I just don't think that people are aware that these are three distinct categories. And according to the Rambam, all three come under the prohibition of do not deviate from what they say left or right, and then also obey what the Sanhedrin says. Okay, any questions? Okay. So if hopefully people don't mind, I do want to go, I want to get to our main question today. Okay, so let's go a little bit further. There's still a little bit more background. I'm just going to read this in English. The Rambam addresses a question, which is, how do the Rabonin have the right to make these halachos? Okay, so this is in the introduction to the Mishnah Torah after his list of mitzvos. So he just listed all Taryag mitzvos, all 613, and then he says, these are the 613 mitzvos that were said to Moshe on Sinai with their general principles, their particulars, and all their details. All the general principles, particulars, and details and explanations for each and every mitzvah is the Torah Sheba'al Peh that was received from Beis Din to Beis Din. Okay, so that's our category A. Okay, in the Rabbanans, that's Torah Sheba'al Peh. All right. Then he says, there are other mitzvos which were innovated after the giving of the Torah, which were instituted by the prophets and the sages, which became widespread throughout all of Israel, such as the reading of the Megillah, the Hanukkah candle, Tisha B'Av, the washing of the hands, and Eruvin. Each of these mitzvos has explanations and details, all of which are explained in this compilation, the Mishnah Torah. We are obligated to accept and keep each of these innovated mitzvos. As it is stated, you shall not deviate from anything they tell you to the left or to the right or to the left. They are not considered additions to the mitzvos of the Torah. Okay, so you have to keep them, and they're not considered adding to Torah. But then he says, and what is the Torah prohibition of you shall not add to it and you shall not subtract to it from it? Answer, that a prophet is not permitted to innovate a thing and say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu charged him with this mitzvah to add to the mitzvahs of the Torah or to subtract from one of the 613 mitzvahs. But if Beis Din, along with a prophet of that time, will add a mitzvah by way of takana or by way of hora'ah, an ordinance, or by way of gezerah, this does not constitute an addition. For they did not say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us to make an eruv or to read the Megillah in its time. If they said this, they would be adding to the Torah. So this is a critical thing in the Rambam system of keeping deoraisas and derabanan separate. And if the rabbis did not make it clear what was coming from them and what was coming from God, then they would violate Baal Tosif, adding to the Torah. And he gives an example, which is timely, okay, because we're approaching Purim. Rather, we say as follows: the prophets, along with the Beis Din, instituted and commanded us in the reading of the Megillah in its proper time, in order to mention the praises of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'd say to recall the praises of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the salvations he did for us, that he was near to our salvation, in order to bless him and to praise him, and in order to make known to the coming generations that which was stated in the Torah, that which was stated in the Torah is true. As it is stated, for which is a great nation that has a God who is close to it, as Hashem, our God, whenever we call to him. So in other words, this is an example of how Chazal created a mitzvah to amplify a Torah theme. In this case, it's the theme that God responds to our tefillos and that he always will save us. And they made the reading of the Megillah to obligate us to do this. The same goes for each and every rabbinic mitzvah, whether a positive or a negative commandment. So it's either going to be protecting a doraisa prohibition or amplifying a doraisa theme. Okay, so that's the end of the Rambam. All right, the Ran comes in now, and we're going to be reading, again, apparently not today, because we took more time than I anticipated, but from the 7th of his drashos. And he is going to reiterate what the Rambam says. He says, there are two aspects included in the prohibition of you shall not deviate from anything that the sages tell you, right or left. So he doesn't say three categories, he only says two. He says, first, we are obligated to follow the sages' consensus in what they have ruled regarding the laws of the Torah. For example, whether something is halachically pure or impure, liable or exempt. Now that goes in the Rambam's categories A and B, okay, the teachings of the Torah laws. Second, we must not deviate from all the fences and enactments that the sages have enacted for us as a safeguard of the Torah law. That is the Rambam's category C. Therefore, anyone who transgresses any one of the shavusin, the rabbinic injunctions, transgresses a negative commandment from the Torah, as it is stated, do not deviate, etc. There's no difference between one who moves a needle from the sun to the shade on Shabbos, which would be a violation of the rabbinic law of muksa, because you're handling a needle, or one who goes out on Shabbos or Yom Tov wearing hobnailed sandals, as in a certain incident, okay, which I was not familiar with this, okay? Apparently, hobnailed sandals are kind of like what people refer to as cleats, like I guess shoes that have like spikes on the bottom. And apparently there was an incident where there was like a stampede and people got killed because they were trampling on each other with these spiked shoes. So Chazal said it was usher to wear spiked shoes on Shabbos. I don't know what it had to do with Shabbos or Yom Tov, but they made a law like this. And I think it's interesting that the Ron mentions this because there are certain enactments that they made that were for practical case-by-case, specific incidents that they made this into a universal prohibition. Okay, so that's another case of rabbinic decree. Yeah, Maya?
I thought that this was like you shouldn't wear spikes under your shoes so that you won't be preparing like the ground for seeds.
So I would have thought that also. And when I looked this up, let me advertise. Hold on, we have a commercial break. So if you are ever going to learn Drashos Haran, so ArtScroll recently came out with this new English Drashos Haran that I guess the guy who translated it, Rabbi Yehuda Meir Kielsen, apparently davens in our shul, and he gave Yeshiva a copy of it. So I looked in his copy, and he says it's referring to this specific incident in Shabbos Samach Amud Aleph, where people were trampled. That's what he says. He says, yeah, it says a group of people wearing such sandals once gathered in a cave to hide from enemies. When they heard noises from above, they panicked, fearing that they had been discovered, and ran to escape. In the stampede that followed, many were killed because of the nails in their sandals. To prevent similar tragedies, the sages prohibited wearing these sandals outside on special days when people gathered together, such as Shabbos and Yom Tov. There you go. Okay. So he says there's no difference between carrying a needle and wearing hobnailed sandals, which are midurabanan, and one who eats chalev, which is forbidden fats that are chayav kares midoraisa, and one who plows with an ox and a donkey together. Okay, now you might have a question. So he's saying right now there's no difference because rabbinic laws are backed by deoraisa, by Torah law. Then there's no difference between rabbinic laws and Torah laws. What question could you ask on that?
Just what? No difference in what way?
Right now he's saying there's no difference. That both of them, since the rabbinic laws stem from Torah law of don't deviate from what they say. So then whenever you violate a rabbinic law, you're violating a Torah law, and therefore there is no difference between Torah laws and rabbinic laws.
So what would be the point of distinguishing between the two?
So what would be the point of distinguishing between the two? And do you have specific distinctions in mind? Oh, sorry, hold on a second. Let me build up the question. So Rambam says the point in distinguishing between the two is that if the rabbis did not make it clear that their laws are coming from them, then they would be violating adding to the Torah. Okay, so that is a difference. But think, what other differences are you familiar with in practice between rabbinic laws and biblical laws?
Usually when there's a suffix or a doubt between Deoraita or Derabanan, we're strict when it comes to Deoraita, and we're
exactly
more when it comes to Derabanan.
Right. So we really differentiate a lot. We say suffix Deoraita lechumra, suffix Derabanan lekula. That when you're in a case of doubt about a Torah law, you act stringently, and when you're in a doubt about the rabbinic law, you go leniently. So most common daily example of this probably is if you're in doubt about whether to make a bracha on food before eating food. Like let's say like you forget whether you made a bracha or not. So what's the halacha is you don't make a bracha. Why? Because saying God's name in vain is a biblical prohibition, but saying brachos over food is rabbinic. So you go lenient on the rabbinic by not saying the bracha, and you protect the deoraisa of not risking saying God's name in vain. The only exception is with the birkas hamazon, because that is deoraisa. Okay, so isn't that a big difference? And furthermore, so the Ron addresses this question. He says, regarding that which the Gemara says, suffix derabanan lekula, that in cases of rabbinic doubt, we go leniently. And then also there are other differentiations. For example, he says this, there's a principle, the sages gave legal credibility to minors in cases involving rabbinic law. So just without going into details here, generally speaking, for Torah laws, if you are a minor, you cannot testify, right? So like if a 5-year-old witnesses a murder, we don't accept the 5-year-old's testimony. But in certain cases of rabbinic law, we do accept a 5-year-old's testimony. Okay. Similarly, we say that in b'makom hefsed mamon, in a place of monetary loss, lo hemiyu divrei b'makom hefsed mamon, that the rabbinic laws don't apply in certain situations of monetary loss. Okay. Another case is mipnei kavod habrios, right? Here's a classic example. I feel like everyone knows this halacha because, like, I don't know if everyone knows this halacha, but like, you know, it's usher to tear toilet paper on Shabbos, right? Okay, that we know, right? but what do you do if you find yourself in a bathroom and there's no toilet, and the toilet paper is not torn, right? So the halacha is you're allowed to rip the toilet paper not on the dotted lines. And the reason why is because ripping toilet paper not on the dotted lines is only asur midirabanan, and there's a principle of kavod habrios, of human dignity, overrides certain dirabanans. Okay, so in that case, like the human dignity of like not going around disgusting with like bathroomy stuff, overrides the dirabanan, and you're allowed to tear the toilet paper on Shabbos, at least according. I think this is a universal thing. I've never heard anyone disagree with this. That's why I'm saying it. And also certain cases it says Simchas Yom Tov. In certain cases, they're lenient on things done for Simchas Yom Tov that are derabanan. So the question is like, what do you mean, Ron, that there's no difference between derabanan and deraisa? We make many differentiations. So what's his answer? Okay, so you hear the question? Why do we differentiate? So let's set it up again. If all rabbinic laws are backed by deraisas, and anytime you violate a rabbinic law, then you're violating a Torah law, and there's no difference, so then why do we make all these differences? So his answer is very simple. All of this is because these were the initial stipulations that the sages made when instituting these laws in the first place. Okay, in other words, when Chazal set up the rabbinic laws, they built into the laws that these laws are not in force when you're going to have a monetary loss. These laws are not in force when there's going to be a breach of human dignity. These laws are not in force, or can be enforced with by a minor. These laws are not going to override Simchas Yom Tov. And also, and this is going to be the mind trippy thing, okay? It is according to the Rambam at least, the whole halacha of Safek D'Oraisa L'Chumra and Safek D'Rabanan L'Kula, that we go strict in D'Oraisa and we go lenient in D'Rabanan, that law itself is D'Rabanan. Okay, in other words, like if you had a doubt about whether you've done a D'Oraisa mitzvah, Mid'Oraisa, you wouldn't have to do it, but the Rabbanan obligated you to do it, and the Rabbanan didn't obligate you to do it Mid'Rabanan. Okay, it's a little weird. Okay, fine. Okay, so that takes us through our facts. Okay, I want to go really, really quickly. I want to expose you to the source Mid'Rabanan. So if you have to leave, then that's fine. I'm sorry. I went overtime, but I'm going to go 10 minutes overtime beyond this. Okay, just so we can have the question for next time. Okay, so I'm going to skip a little bit here. Okay, so there's a mishnah in Avodah Zarah, second parak, Mishnah 5. Rabbi Yehuda said, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yehoshua Rabbi Yishmael asked Rabbi Yeshua a series of questions while they were traveling along the road. For what reason did the rabbis prohibit the cheese of non-Jews? Okay, so there's an Isser called Gavinas Akum, eating cheese made by non-Jews. And they had a practice back then that whenever the Rabbanan made a new law, the rabbis would not state the reason for the rabbinic law until a year had passed. And the reason why was because they wanted the law to become entrenched and people to keep it. And they felt that if people knew the reason behind the law, then they would find like they would either treat it lightly or they would find ways around it. So Rabbi Yishmael is now asking Rabbi Yeshua, okay, you guys prohibited the cheese of non-Jews. Okay, why? So basically what happens, I'm going to skip this, is Rabbi Yeshua gives him an answer, and then Rabbi Yishmael refutes the answer. Okay. And says that doesn't make any sense. And then Rabbi Yishmael gives him another answer, and then Rabbi Yeshua gives him another answer, and then Rabbi Yishmael refutes that one. Okay, so then it says Hisil Davar Acher. Instead of answering Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yeshua diverted his attention to another matter. Okay, this is a classic move that I feel like some parents and some teachers do. Is if they don't want to answer the question, they just distract them. Okay, so he distracted him by quoting a pasuk in shiurim. Okay, and he said, "Yishmael Achi, Yishmael my brother, Heach ata kore." How do you read the following pasuk in shiurim? So the pasuk says, "Kitovim," and then it says this word dalad yud. I'm gonna go like this: dalad yud chaf. Okay, miyayin. Okay, that says the pasuk says, "May he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth." For dalad yud chaf is better than wine. So there are two ways to read it. Okay, do you read it as dodecha, your love with a capital Y, meaning God's love is better than wine? Or do you read it as dodayich, feminine, your love, lowercase y, meaning the love of Klal Yisrael is better than wine? Okay, so again, background info. Shir Shirim, according to Chazal, is like a love song that's allegorical between God, who is depicted as the husband, and Klal Yisrael, who's depicted as the wife. And this pasuk says, your love is better than wine. But the question is, who is the your? Is it God's love is better than wine? Or is it Klal Yisrael's love is better than wine? Okay, so Rabbi Shmuel said to him, Dodaich, your love is better. Rabbi Yeshua replied, it is not so, for its companion demonstrates regarding it that it should be vowelized in the masculine form. Your oils, shmanecha, masculine, have a good fragrance. So in other words, the pasuk right after it says you're referring to God. Therefore, this pasuk should be dodacha and is also referring to God. And the Mishnah ends there. Okay, so just to recap here, they're having this conversation. What's the reason for prohibiting the cheese made by non-Jews? He gives an answer, refutes it. He gives an answer, refutes it. And instead of giving another answer, he distracts them with a seemingly random shirim drasha. Okay, and then the Mishnah ends. Okay, so the Gemara on that says, and this highlighted line is the line that's going to be our central midrash that we're going to try to focus on for next time. My kitubim dedacha miyayin. What does it mean that God's love is better than wine? Ki asa Rav Dimi Amar. So when Rav Dimi came, he said, Amra Knesset Yisrael lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The congregation of Israel said before God, Arevim alai dibri dodacha yosur miyena shel Torah. Master of the universe, the words of your loved ones, meaning the rabbis, are sweeter to me than the wine of Torah. Okay, now, if you just read that, there could be many ways that you can interpret it. Okay, so for example, Rashi doesn't even hold that this is about Durabanans and Doraisas. Rashi says that the explanations that Chazal gave to the Torah Shebechsav are sweeter than the pasukim themselves. Okay, which is a reasonable reading. Okay, others say that like I don't know. Okay, well, whatever. There's different ways to learn it. Okay, but here's how the Ran takes it. Okay, the Ran says it appears that the Gemara's conclusion is in accordance with Rabbi Yochanan, who said HaKadosh Baruch Hu only sealed a covenant with Israel on the basis of the principles of the oral Torah. And then he says, Ikar hasachar hu bamesh yechadshu hachachamim uvamesh yiskanu k'dei lasos siag laTorah. That the essential reward for keeping Torah is that which the sages innovated and enacted as a safeguard for Torah. In other words, derabanans. And that's the ikar schar, the essential reward. And he says, therefore, Rabbi Yeshua said to Rabbi Shmuel when he asked him, why did the sages prohibit the cheeses of non-Jews? And Rabbi Yeshua did not wish to reveal the reason for this decree, for the reason stated in the Gemara. Instead, he said to him, okay, then he goes through the whole thing with the how do you read the pasuk? So he says, even though they stated in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yeshua diverted Rabbi Shmuel to another topic by broaching the subject of how to read the pasuk in Shir Shirim, they did not mean to say that it was entirely unrelated. In other words, he didn't just distract him with a random thing. Rather, they meant to say that he would not tell him the reason for the prohibition, but instead prevented him from asking further. And Rabbi Yeshua gave him the reason that he should cease asking, quote, for your love is better than wine, thereby alluding to what the Gemara said. The congregation of Israel said before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the words of the beloved ones are more pleasant to me than the wine of Torah. In other words, according to the Ran, Rabbi Shmuel kept on asking why did the rabbis prohibit the cheese of non-Jews? And Rabbi Yeshua was not just distracting him, he was saying, look, man, look, my brother, okay, this is a Isser Derabanan, and Klal Yisrael says that Derabanans are more beloved to them than the wine of Torah. And the Ran is saying that means that Derabanan, the essential reward for Torah is from keeping the Derabanans, not from keeping the Doraisas. And that is our mission, to understand why is that the case. Okay, why would that be? And again, it sounds absurd. The Doraisas are from God, okay, and the Derabanans are only there to protect what's from God. So how can you say that it's superior in any sense? And furthermore, what's up with this like poetic way of describing it, that the words of your loved ones, so it's describing the rabbis as God's loved ones, are sweeter to me, what's with a sweeter to me, than the wine of Torah. Okay, now you could just say that there's no significance to loved ones, sweeter, and wine. You could just say that since it's a drasha on Shir Shirim, it's just using the same poetic phrases, and really it just means Derabanans are better than Doraisas. Or you could say that characterizing it as the wine of Torah, and characterizing the rabbis as your beloved ones, and categorizing like the superiority as like sweetness or pleasantness is somehow like essential. Okay, so your homework, should you choose to accept it, is to think about the original question, which is, what is the impetus for one to follow halachos derabanan? So we know now halachically the impetus is you have to, okay, right? But then when I'm sitting alone at night in the privacy of my own home, what should motivate me not to eat chicken with cheese? Okay, and so in other words, granted, Chazal were trying to protect the doraisas, but what should motivate me to do that? Like, is it just that doraisas are from God and we really care about stuff from God and therefore I should be very careful? Or is there something else? And again, if you look at the Ran, it sounds like there's a lot more. It's saying the essential reward comes from keeping the derabanans, and it is sweet. You know, it's characterized as sweeter than the wine of Torah, which to me and to the Ran means that there seems to be some perfection or some like actual superiority in the derabanans and some additional reward there. Okay, and then the other question is Maya's question, which is this is going to be hard to answer on your own, but like how did this evolve? Okay, or how detailed was it supposed to get? That one that's not part of your homework. Okay, that's just something we hope to answer. And then Essie's question, which is related to this chicken and cheese thing, how do we relate to it psychologically, attitude wise to these derabanans? Okay, so sorry, not sorry that we didn't get as far as I thought, because I think it was okay. You tell me, and I genuinely want your other homework is you could message me if you want. Tell me, did you find this helpful to go through the Rabbanan stuff? Because like I was kind of doing this just to cover our bases, and also because other people will be listening to this. So I say for you who were present and for anyone who hears this year, please tell me if this helped you, because if I ever give this year again, look, I say this a lot. I did not go through Jewish education as a kid, so I don't know what is well known and what is not well known. I've just seen from my own experience as a high school teacher that high school students don't know this stuff, and even yeshiva students don't necessarily know this stuff. So that's why I kind of like erred on the side of caution. Okay, so
I wish this had been taught more clearly. I mean, I have some ideas, but yeah, but very like shifting boundaries in a lot of these categories. Like I have some idea, but very poor distinctions.
Okay, good. Oh, can I just add one more point about minhag? Sorry. What is the idea of minhag? Okay, so, and I'm talking minhag, the things that Chazal enacted. So this is my own explanation, which is, if you look at cultures, like let's look at like I don't know, Mexican culture, right? So what do? They have certain types of music, they have certain types of food, they have certain types of clothing. Okay, every culture has certain minhagim. Okay, other cultures don't have gezeros and takanos, but they have minhagim. So what Chazal wanted to do is, if they saw people doing things of their own accord, like let's say like singing Hallel, okay, which is a musical thing, or wearing white on Yom Kippur, okay, or getting up early and having extra tefillos on the Aseret Tshuva, or beseeching God in certain ways, because they're moved to during davening. That's our customs. Just like in Japan and Mexico and Germany, they have certain customs. But what Chazal did is they incorporated it into the halachic system and gave it a halachic structure and endorsed it formally to make it a part of Torah. That to show that our minhagim are in service of the values and ideas of Torah, not like the minhagim of the other nations, where it could be in service of you really like tacos, or in service of like you really like that melody. So that's like the place of minhagim according to my understanding. Okay.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I was once talking with Rabbi Ginsburg about that. He said like what you said, and that kind of like with a different, slightly different emphasis, that the purpose was that people shouldn't just go along and just do things that they're just going to do. If they're going to be doing it, Chazal kept an eye out on it and made sure to incorporate things back into the halachos, that the people were always in the framework of relating to the Rabbanan.
That's really good. That's another important thing, right? So it allowed them to have jurisdiction on the practice, so that they could tweak it as necessary or prevent it from deviating from its proper intent.
Yes, and that the people should always be doing things that the Rabbanan said, that they shouldn't just be going off. That when they were doing it anyway, they were doing it anyway. But now they weren't just doing it; they were doing it, and this is what the Rabbanan said to do. So they were still always related to the Rabbanan that way. That's good.
That's a good additional point. Yeah. Okay. If there are any questions, I'll take questions. I just don't want to hold you beyond the time, but. And if not, then I guess talk to you, Bli Neder, next week, and hope to see you back where we answer the question. Okay. All right. Have a good Shabbos, everybody.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Have a good
All right,
job.
thanks for coming. Bye.